So today I'm going to be focused on a very complex and intricate idea. This idea has a lot of political, cultural, and social dynamics to it that I'll really have to get into before I get into
That was Randon Heim. Randon is the host of Don't Worry, We'll Talk It Out, a podcast exploring the fundamental concepts that drive how we perceive the world. The psychology of a riot, the Black Death, coronavirus race relations, and ignorance is bliss, how anti-intellectualism ruined America, are just a few examples of subjects Randon has covered on his show. But today he joins me to discuss cancel culture. My name is Sam Breakgear and you're listening to Brains Bite Back, your weekly podcast looking at how our brains, psychology, and society are impacted by the ever-evolving technology that surrounds us. If you are unfamiliar with the term cancel culture, well, you're in the right place. But to give you a brief description, cancel culture refers to the act of withdrawing support for public figures and companies that have done or said something considered objectionable or offensive. In this episode, we discuss the positive and negative use cases of cancel culture, how innocent citizens have been impacted by this, and beloved historical figures who could have been impacted by cancel culture due to skeletons in their closets. Since it's impossible to future-proof what we say or post against the moral standards of tomorrow, we explore how society's perception of past comments, pictures, or posts will evolve in time, and what it will take for us to find a healthy relationship with cancel culture. And before we move on with the show, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone that has left us a review, either positive or negative. The positive ones we of course love, and the negative ones, as long as they offer some constructive feedback, I'm all on board for them. And I'm going to start off by naming one right now, and this one's from Zidthra. It says skip this one, and they've given us 1 star, which is not ideal, but they did say, sorry, too much talking, not enough information. So I'm at least grateful for them explaining the reason why they feel this way, and something we can improve on. And for a more positive one, this one's from I can't even say that, GABCTIJGFC, who says, very informative, they've given us 5 stars, wide variety of interesting topics, really enjoyed the Digital Nomad episode, host has a great voice. Thank you very much for your kind words. Admittedly, I can't take too much credit for my voice, it's just the voice I was born with, but nonetheless, thank you very much. So please keep the reviews coming. No matter what your thoughts are on the show, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave reviews on iTunes or any other podcasting platform that allows it, or alternatively, you can reach out to us directly at @thesociable on Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think. Anyway, on with the show. Tell Me Your Startup Will Disrupt Industries. I'll add you to a list of thousands of other entrepreneurs who have said the same thing and failed. Sure, you believe in your company and its product, but it's one thing saying this yourself and another to have an industry influencer say it about you. And that is the power of digital PR. If you're ready to gear your business towards growth and gain, our sponsor Publicize is a digital communication agency that has helped businesses like yours gain exposure in major online publications for the past decade. And for a limited time only, exclusive to Brains Bite Back listeners, you can receive an SEO assessment as part of your package for any tier of service at no extra charge with this special promotion. To find out more, visit publicize.co/BBB. Random, would you be able to tell our listeners who you are and a little bit about your podcast? Don't worry, we'll talk it out.
Sam, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. My name is Randon Heim. I run this podcast, Don't Worry, We'll Talk It Out. And currently, I'm in a clinical psychology doctorate program. I have a background in neuroscience and philosophy. So everything I just mentioned, I like to kind of bring all of that into the podcast. I also love music, so I love throwing I have cool little interludes that I do there, and I like to talk about a lot of big kind of abstract concepts like we're going to talk about today with cancel culture. I've done a few episodes on that. I've done one episode about anti-intellectualism. And I'm really interested really in just the kind of, I guess, kind of ethereal things that kind of function what we really believe in and how we conceptualize the world and society. So that's what a lot of my topics are normally kind of centered around.
Yeah, I saw that and I really liked it. And actually, you mentioned the music, and I have to say, I do really like the music that you add because I think it really kind of complements your voice. When I first heard your podcast, I was like, oh, this fella has a nice voice. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until afterwards where you mentioned like you're from the South, and then I heard the kind of like Southern accent of yours,
Yeah.
and I realized that's why I like it, because I mentioned to you before, I love New Orleans. Like the South for me,
Mhm.
I have some kind of like romanticized image of the South. So I think that like your Southern accent with that kind of music piled on top of each other made me really go like, this is sounds like some kind of like lounge, like relaxing
Right.
lounge music. I
I
like
mean,
it.
I have a few people who like to listen to me before they go to sleep. They think I have a they think I have a kind of a calming voice for that.
I can see that. Yeah, I definitely would say that. It's funny though, because the topics which you discuss are not exactly the
Mhm.
topics that would send someone to sleep, in the sense that they're quite
Right.
like heavy and deep. So, so
Right.
it's like heavy subjects in a relaxing tone. So it's a good
Mhm.
combination in that sense. But I wanted to bring you on today because I heard one of your episodes and I really loved it, and I thought that you had some fantastic talking points. And I think it's particularly relevant for our audience just because it so overlaps with psychology, which is like a major focus of yours, and I know
Mhm.
something that you really specialize in, and also technology, because cancel culture, what we're going to discuss, I suppose technology and Twitter and social media and all of that is almost like the steroids for like accelerating cancel culture, or even potentially destroying people's careers with like a avalanche of tweets and posts and all that sort of thing. So I definitely think it's very applicable to have you on to discuss this. So if you can, could you briefly explain what is cancel culture and also highlight some positive and negative examples of its use?
Yeah, absolutely. So cancel culture is, to say the least, it's very, very complex. It involves really kind of, I guess, an amalgamation of several factors. So, like, we can start with the history, right? So, especially from an American standpoint, we start in the 80s and 90s, you have political correctness, right? And political correctness is really, it's really a focus on language, right? How was an individual speaking about certain groups, either marginalized groups or kind of power dynamics of certain groups? How were they using their language, and how was that actually impacting that group, right? Whether through public policy or just how we talked about them, regular, normally in society. So then going forward, like you mentioned, we start having social media. Social media started really around 2013, 2014, right? You got 2014 is when everyone was like, this is when your mom's on Facebook, this is when you have 100 million people kind of immediately just kind of joining it. And then we got into kind of 2015, 2016. This is when that word cancel culture started to come out. Another word for it is call out culture, excuse me. And what this really it really originated from the Me Too movement, which is, I don't think, really discussed a lot, but it makes sense when you start thinking about, and this will be some of the positives that I can bring up about it. Once this originated in the Me Too culture, it was the idea that you have so many people in powerful places in society who kind of use their either power, wealth, privilege to to hurt marginalized groups. So it really popped up like that. Right now we have a platform where I can I can literally try, not like I can talk to Tom Hanks if I wanted to, but I could, right? I can send him a message, and who knows, he might see it. So that's where that
Mhm.
started. This is where it eventually led to individuals like R. Kelly, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Kevin Spacey. These were all individuals who held a lot of esteem, a lot of respect and power, and really were getting away with things for decades. Sometimes, for the case of Bill Cosby, for decades without any reprimand or any sort of justice. So that's where we get into the concept of cancel culture kind of being reconciled with social justice and things like that. Now, for the negatives, which was, I kind of discussed this on my podcast, is that to me, there's really two types of cancel culture. There's one for celebrities, but it eventually started to get one for innocent civilians. And that's where it started to get kind of negative to me, because I thought, okay, this is getting a little dangerous now, because celebrityism is one thing, right? It's one thing to, I guess, quote, call out or cancel an individual who's, of course, been committing felonies, right? They're committing immoral acts on humankind. But when we start getting nitpicky, and this is where it kind of reconciles with political correctness, we've become so nitpicky in the semantics of what an individual has to say regarding certain circumstances that are happening, especially from an American perspective. And once this kind of started, I think it's gotten to the point now where it's really not black and white. It's really gray. It's really right in the
Mm.
middle, because there are a lot of individuals, and I talk about this on the podcast, of an example of a man named Emmanuel Cafferty.
Mhm.
And Emmanuel he's a Latino individual, and he happened to be making a sign, which is the OK symbol. This is a classic symbol, just holding up the OK symbol. That's a universal sign.
Yeah.
It has been kind of captured by white supremacist groups to mean white power, right? And a man took a picture of Emmanuel when he was making this in his car, and they accused Emmanuel of being a white supremacist. Again, Emmanuel is from Latino descent.
Mm.
In no way was he referencing any sort of white power or anything like that. Emmanuel's been fired from his job. He was immediately, reprimanded, and he's had trouble getting a job ever since, right? And this is a regular individual. He was a truck driver, a man just trying to make it, part of the working class.
Mm.
And a lot of individuals took what they saw and they ran with it. And
Mhm.
I think we'll be able to get into a lot of reasons, going forward from this podcast of why that happened, right? What is social media really doing to us to kind
Mm.
of change our morals and change how we frame certain situations that we might not really understand fully what's going on. So I think in a nutshell, that's kind of where, like, the history of cancel culture has kind of came.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that case that you highlighted in your podcast with Emmanuel, that surprised me. Not necessarily because someone saw it and like tried calling him out for it, but more that the fact that the company upheld it. The fact that he lost his job because of it, it just sounds so bizarre and so extreme.
Mhm.
And I also have to agree with you when you say that it's complicated. It's a very gray area. I personally feel very uncertain as a white British male
Mhm.
living in Colombia, having a podcast for like a US audience. The one thing that I've found is that perceptions of what is correct and incorrect, or politically correct, or right or wrong, is so based in culture as well. Like, for example, there are things that I can say in the UK which I probably wouldn't be able to say in the US. And there's no like venom in like the words necessarily. It's just the perception. And same with like here in Colombia, there are things they say which, or I'm like, wow, I couldn't say that in the UK, and they just say it like so freely. So
Mhm.
it's definitely a cultural thing, and it's difficult to see it on an international level in that sense.
Right.
But I did want you to share a few examples, because I heard some really interesting examples on your show of historical figures
Mhm.
that could have been victims of cancel culture. Would you be able to share who they were and why they might have been criticized today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sam, because on my particular episode about cancel culture, I purposely wanted to find individuals that we have held of such moral high esteem for so many years, right? For decades. So I purposely picked out particularly two individuals, which was Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi, right?
Mm.
These are two individuals that, especially from looking at history, right, you would have thought that these individuals have never had any flaw or moral transgression in their lifetime. So I did a lot of research. I did a lot of digging, particularly looking at a lot of their both Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King's biographers to try to see just what actually happened in their lives, and how would particular things, any wrongs that, of course, we're all human, we're all imperfect. Any wrongs that they would have had, I wonder how this would be perceived today. So we can start with Gandhi, right? Gandhi, of course, helped India establish freedom from British rule. And he was doing all of this pretty later in his life, in his 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. But a lot of his writings in his early 20s, Gandhi had some racist ideologies that he had in his early life. He particularly always called the Africans who he was around, he called them dirty. He said they lived like animals, that they were uncivilized, right? And Gandhi would go on, and later on in his life, of course, to reprimand these thoughts. He was, staunchly an anti-racist at the kind of toward the end of his life, obviously.
Mm.
Um, but I began to think, I wonder what would have happened if, I don't know, Gandhi had a Twitter account or something like that, right? It's kind of a fun kind of, I guess, game to play because it is interesting, right? This is a fault, right? And on all accounts, right? Gandhi was a young man who was coming into his own. He had a lot of ideas about European civilization that was kind of instilled in him at an early age, and he had to get away
Mm,
from that. He had to get away from some of these ideologies, and he had to become an independent thinker and
mhm,
think for himself. And that's where I kind of just realized I wonder what would have happened if Gandhi was 50 or 60 and he was on social media, and it came out for the first time in his journals in his 20s that Gandhi was using, pejorative terms for Africans.
mm,
Who knows? Who knows what would have happened? He would have had to, publicly apologize. There would have been, a cultural shaming, in a sense, of him. And who knows what would have happened? Maybe he just would have, been cast on the wayside as just another racist.
mhm,
And then for my MLK example, I use something that, and this, I think we can have a good conversation about this, Sam, because what I found, this is from David Burrow, who is the biographer of Dr. Martin Luther King. He's written over 4 biographies
mhm,
for MLK. So what I'm about to say is this is a reputable source. And he's kind of prepping us for what's going to happen 7 years from now. So 7 years from now, the FBI are going to reveal some audio tapes that have been locked in the National Archives in the Library of Congress for 50 years, right?
mhm,
The FBI had wiretaped Dr. Martin Luther King's apartments on various times. J. Edgar Hoover was very, obviously very against Martin Luther King's messages. And what they found is that they have some audio tapes of Martin Luther King being in extramarital affairs
mhm,
a few times in his life. The Library of Congress, locked this for 50 years, but in 2027, these are going to be released to the public. And we are going to have a very serious and difficult conversation about the legacy of the great man who is, MLK.
mhm,
And we're going to have a reckoning, right? We're going to have a reckoning again with morality. But
mhm.
the answer to me is very simple, right? He was an imperfect being, as he constantly said. And him, of course, being a minister, he was always saying, he was born in sin, and this is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I just to put that out there for me, and I'm a young man, I'm 23, and I've made mistakes myself, and I will make mistakes going forward.
Mhm.
But it's really just about coming together and really understanding that we're all imperfect, and even the greatest, moral kind of hierarchy we can put someone on, they made
Mm.
mistakes too. But in
Yeah.
cancel culture, that's not allowed.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think we have a similar situation in the UK at the moment where, as a result of, I think, Black Lives Matter, the UK has taken up protests to show solidarity with the US, I believe.
Hmm.
However, we are now questioning many statues that we have of slave owners or those that have, to some extent, encouraged it in some way. In my home city, I'm very proud that there was an angry mob and they tore down a statue and then
Hmm.
we chucked it in the harbour. And I think it was in London, there was a statue of Winston Churchill, and I think there's now a debate going on, or whether or not if we should still have that statue, or how much we should celebrate Winston Churchill, because much like Gandhi, I think that he was famously like quite racist, and maybe at the time they were considered normal or acceptable or whatever, but obviously now like it's not something that we necessarily want to celebrate,
Hmm.
even though he was someone that played like a huge role in our history.
Of course.
So it's very complicated, and I'm going to be interested to see how the perception of Winston Churchill develops as we, I suppose, have this conversation.
Hmm.
But also as well, like going back to your point about nobody's perfect and we're all going to make mistakes. I mean, that's a given. And
Hmm.
also on top of that, it's not necessarily the fact that whether we do something now which is considered right or wrong, but you did mention in your show how our perceptions of what right and wrong is, it comes from a perspective of morals in that current time. So it seems almost impossible to future proof what we say or post against the moral standards of tomorrow. So, how do you think our perception of past comments, pictures, and posts will evolve in time? Like, for example, will we become more accepting? And Do you think this idea that you mentioned, that no one's perfect, will slowly begin to accept the fact that no one's perfect and will give more freedom? Or do you think that we'll learn to view posts or comments within the time that they were published or spoken?
Yeah, I mean that's another great question because well, look, you mentioned culture, you've mentioned the evolution of society. I mean, these are obvious things that morality is not rigid. I mean, we know that, right?
Hmm.
And to say these things is to is really to get at the just a changing perception of what is evil and what is good. I think especially America, we have I think it's a bad tendency to label things as kind of, I guess, moral absolutism, right? That was an evil act, therefore this individual is evil,
Mm.
reprimanded. This person has said good things all his life, so he will be praised forever.
Hmm.
But that's not, that's of course not the way the world really works. Morality seems to be relative. It seems to be indicative, as you mentioned, right? There are certain things that someone in Colombia might say that in America, well, good luck if you said those things in
Mm.
public. Who knows what's going to happen? If you're a high making executive and you say those things, well, you might get fired or your institution might get canceled, right? Boycotted against, which is another, I guess, another
Mm.
form. I don't know. I think, Sam, I think we're plagued with somewhat of a burden of information. How easy it was for me to look up Gandhi and MLK, or even to an extent Malcolm X's history.
Mm.
It's the easiest thing in the world, right? It took me less than 25 minutes to find these bad things and good things that these individuals have done.
Hmm.
Because of that, I think a lot of people in my generation, and you mentioned, tearing down the statues, it's so easy for us to go, you know what? Columbus was a genocidal maniac. Okay,
Hmm.
well, okay, sure, yes, that's absolutely true, and it is okay to hold two different kind of ideals in your head and keep going. I think F. Scott Fitzgerald said that to have two opposing ideas in your head and
Hmm.
continue to move forward is very difficult. But these are the signs of someone who's emotionally mature enough to keep going. So to kind of bring it back to future proofing, that's impossible.
Mm.
It is impossible to future proof what you might expect a future society to look at you and say, well, I don't know what was going on with these millennials, but they should have been using this term for, I don't know, for trans people, right?
Mm.
Who would have thought, and we're trying our best now
Mm.
to try to try to just bring up some empathy and compassion into society as a whole.
Mm.
Now, overall, I think we're actually becoming more compassionate. I mean, and this shows we're trying not to trigger individuals, right? That in a way, a lot of these taking down of statues might be, these are all good intentions. I think the idea is good, right? We don't want to hold up individuals who had maybe bad or evil thoughts up on a pedestal, and that
Mm.
makes sense. But it's also one thing to be mad at that history, but it's also another thing to be aware of it, right? These are individuals who are kind of victims of their history. That's really all it is, right? I can't really fault, in a way, I can't fault the totality of Winston Churchill for an ideal that he had when he was born in 1890. I mean, like, let's be honest with that. And I think that honesty is just very important. And it's really just about studying the history and just trying to come to terms of how it fits into the narrative of today, and being able to balance the bad and the good. And like I said, getting into that gray area, which I think is just so important. And that requires a lot of emotional maturity, I think. And I think because of social media and technology, we're so used to being angry, and we're so used to wanting to tear down the establishment, tear down the
Mm.
institution, that we kind of fail to just come to a kind of a moral reckoning of what this really means and how we can just move forward from that. You know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also have to say, my last point and my last question to you.
Mm.
I would say that it seems that cancel culture doesn't hit everyone fairly. And this example just came to mind. And correct me if I'm wrong. What was the bus incident with Donald Trump? Was it Billy Bush? What's his name?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it Billy Bush?
I
Is
think
that
it
his
is. It's
name?
something Bush. Yeah, his last name
Yeah.
is Bush. Yeah.
Well, there's that fella, and then there's Trump, and it seemed so bizarre to me that as a result of that conversation and that recording that came out, he was then cancelled from or fired from his job.
Wow.
So he lost his job, and then obviously Trump goes on to be president. So it's a weird kind of conflict of one
Mm,
person being like called out for this, losing their job, and the other person goes on to be elected. And this is almost like from the same kind of population. So for me, it seems that cancel culture doesn't impact everyone equally. And
right.
again, you also spoke of a quote from Dow Davis, a black man who actively tries to befriend KKK members, who stated the cure for ignorance is education. I mean, what will it take for us to find a healthy relationship with cancel culture, do you think, where people are judged fairly and rationally, almost like a court of law is supposed to do? Do you think that will ever be at a stage where cancel culture does act in a more rigid way rather than just some random witch hunt where someone
Mm.
gets their career destroyed and the other one is unharmed?
Um, I want to be an optimist. You know, I want to be an optimist, and I want to say yes, but I really don't think so. And the reason is to touch on your Billy Bush and Trump thing. There are some people who are just uncancelable, right?
Mm,
They and Donald Trump is uncancelable, right?
hmm
He can say anything he wants, and he will probably get away with it.
mm,
And most people aren't like that, right? Most people are very afraid of harming others with the things that they say. That's how most people operate. And because of that, in terms of kind of, I guess, trying to bring some basic empathy and compassion into understanding the imperfectness of being of the human condition, I'm actually sometimes reminded of a quote from one of my favorite, I think, minds of the 21st century, Dr. Cornel West. And he once said, when asked about kind of wokeism, he said, it's hilarious. He basically says, it's not about conformity, it's about solidarity. And he says, you can be woke all you want and suffer from insomnia. And what that really is getting at is the fact that calling out individual acts, right, of racism, sexism, homophobia, these are, to an extent, most of the time, the people that you call out of these things, they're not even going to really take into account of what you're saying, right? They're gonna disagree with you in the most part.
mm.
Well, we never really know what's inside a person's heart anyway, unless they're using the obvious pejorative terms of, say, the N word or something like that, when most people are smart enough not to do, right? Because they know they
You'd
will,
hope.
right? But after we get to that, it really fails to take into account a lot of the systems and institutions that kind of can profligate this thinking. And that's why I think when you mentioned, say, Billy Bush getting fired from his job, a lot of these institutions are so scared of the of how the culture is going to perceive them. They're just like, you know what, let's just get away, let's just get away from this guy, just
Mm,
to be on the safe side, because the institution has to listen to the public regardless, right? They're worried about sometimes profit, or they're worried about their perception. And that really gets into one of the I think the myriad of problems here is that, and we touched on this a few times, is that it's moved away from the power dynamics of attacking individuals who are using their power to hurt marginalized groups, whether it's
mhm.
women, black people, or Latino, or Jewish brothers and sisters. And it's really became attacking the individual for his particular acts of racism or xenophobia or something like that. To do that is really a failure, because it constantly gets away from the main problems, where the root of these causes are coming from. And I think if we were to get to a point where we were very, I guess, rational and scientific about our approach to maybe
Mhm.
call out culture, then a lot of this would kind of focus on history. And I've mentioned that constantly, right? It's really about knowing where the individual is at this time, how his
Mhm.
upbringing has influenced how he thinks today, right?
Mhm.
And this is really hard. I mean, it's just hard work to do a lot of this stuff. And because of how easy it is for me to get on Twitter, see something crazy that someone said, uh, text them, a pretty rudely worded, tweet back, and I can feel better about myself. This allows me to feel better. That's really all it is. It's a great dopamine hit. I
Hmm.
have done my moral, I've put up my moral thumb. It's kind of a performative action in a way, and it constantly takes away because once you do that, you're done. Now you're done. I've called out this individual. I've done my moral deed for the day, and I can go about my day. But now I'm not. I've lost focus. I've lost focus of the reason that this individual is speaking this way. I've lost
Hmm.
focus of the reason that this system is allowing him to speak this way in the first place.
Hmm.
Um, so I think so. Yeah, I'll probably end it with that. It's just to quote Dr. West again. It's not about conformity. It's about solidarity. It's about working for your working class brothers and your poor individuals who they're not concerned with call out
Yeah.
culture. They're not concerned with that. So that's not on their priority list, and it can be a priority for a lot of sometimes middle class and high class individuals who are trying to raise their thumb up to
Yeah.
let people know that they're morally good. So
Yeah, I definitely see that as a characteristic of those kind of people, almost like trying to be a superhero for people that they think need help. But I think that's a great quote to finish on. And I also have to say now, 2027 is a year in my calendar, which I'm gonna be like, I'm
oh
always gonna think of that year now as like, oh yeah, I remember Randon said this. Like, we're gonna see what happens. So you
yeah.
definitely left me with that. But if people want to hear more about your show and just generally follow you and keep up to date with what you're doing for like outside of Don't Worry, We'll Talk It Out or whatever,
Mhm.
what's the best way to follow you or listen to your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm available on everything, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I have my own YouTube channel too. So if anyone wants to check out any of the videos, just look up Don't Worry, We'll Talk It Out. You can also follow me on on Instagram. Don't call me out. It's
Yeah.
Randon underscore Heim, Heim. And yeah, I'll be putting out some good stuff soon. I have a episode on positive psychology and authenticity, so that's coming out soon in about a week or two. So I'll get that out. And yeah, thank you, Sam, of course, for allowing me to be on. This was good.
No worries, my pleasure. Once again, thank you to our sponsor, Publicize. Visit their website if you want to find out more about their PR for growth packages, their free resources, or even schedule a call. And for a limited time only, exclusive to Brains Bite Back listeners, you can receive an SEO assessment as part of your package for any tier of service at no extra charge with this special promotion. To find out more, visit publicize.co/BBB. That is all for today's episode. I hope you liked it. If you enjoyed it and you want more just like this, go to sociable.co, where you'll also find articles as well, very similar to the topics we discussed on this show. Additionally, you can follow us on YouTube. If you search Brains Bite Back, you will find our YouTube channel for The Sociable, and follow us and subscribe on all your favorite podcasting platforms. And if you've got something to say, well, tell us on Twitter at The Sociable. Thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful day.